to Zoom and Czarny. I'm Dustin Czarny, Democratic Elections Commissioner for Onondaga County, and this is my interview show. I actually have been on vacation, but really pretty sick all week, so I haven't been able. I wasn't able to do this week's Commissioner in a Car. However, that Commissioner in a Car, I was going to be dealing almost entirely with redistricting, and now I realize after doing this interview with Mr. Wice that that would have been superfluous anyways, because Jeff Wice is the foremost expert on redistricting in New York State. He's been on our program several times, and he agreed to come on to explain what is going on with redistricting in New York. As you know, the Court of Appeals ruled that we will be having new congressional maps in New York State in 2024. So Jeff goes over how that's going to get done, who's going to draw the maps, how that's going to get done, and under what timeline over the next really 6 to 8 weeks. So please stay tuned for the interview. It's a wealth of information, and in 30 minutes, you're going to know everything you need to know about the process going forward for redistricting. There is some breaking news this week. Looks like Governor Hochul is going to be signing the even year legislation, or the election alignment legislation, that moves a lot of offices to even years starting in 2026. So next week, I'll be talking about that quite a bit after the holidays. So, because she hasn't signed it as of the moment of this taping, but it looks like she's probably going to. And by the time this actually airs, she probably would have already signed it. So, I wanted to mention that I'll be dealing with that next year or next week, not next year, but sooner or rather than later. Yeah, and of course the boards of elections are off or doing a lot of holiday stuff, getting caught up on vacation and comp time from all the overtime that we spent getting the election done. So am I. I'm actually out of the office until January 2nd, but I'll still be doing the content that I plan on doing here because the news apparently never stops. So check out my interview coming up right next with Jeff Wice. He's from the New York Law School. He's an expert on redistricting, both here and state and nationally, and he's a wealth of information about what's going to go on in New York for our new congressional lines in 2024. Take care. Back, and I'm happy to have my good friend Jeff Wice of the New York Law School. He's been on our program several times. He's one of the foremost experts on redistricting, and since we had a huge decision that has national implications with the New York redistricting, I was very happy that he made some time to come on our program, and we can get all the explanations that we can get at this point with Mr. Wife. Jeff, thank you for coming back on the program.
Sure, it's great to be back with you, Dustin.
So, Jeff, I know you've been on like 3 or 4 times, especially a couple of years ago when we were going through the redistricting. But why don't you kind of give everybody your background? Because you have been doing redistricting almost all of your professional life. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, where it all started, back in 1978, of course, I'm still only 39 years old, but in 1978, I was representing the New York State Assembly in Washington, D.C., and the then Assembly Speaker, Stanley Steingut, the first Democratic speaker in the modern era, this is 1978, sent me out to the Census Bureau to find out what the census was all about, because Democrats had never in modern state history been in charge of redistricting. And, the Democrats picked up the assembly after the Watergate elections in 1974 and looked forward to finding out, how do you draw the lines? So at that point, I was still in law school. By 1978, 79, Steingut's successor, Stanley Fink, created a team of people and what became LAT4, the Legislative Advisory Task Force on Reapportionment and Demographic Research, to tackle drawing the districts. New York, after 1980, lost 5 congressional districts. That's a record for any one state to ever lose in American history. And at a very young age, I was put in the catbird seat at negotiating both with the Democrats who I worked for and with Republicans. And now it's 40 some odd years later, I'm still around. After the 80s, I branched out and began doing work with the Democratic National Committee. I became their counsel for the 1990s redistricting, and also have stuck with the New York legislature from 1980 through up until 2020, and have worked on redistricting now across the country from California to Maine to Florida. But most of my work recently has been in New York State, where I've been working very intensively with counties, towns, cities, doing this through New York Law School, where I've taken all of my 40 years experience and put it into an academic setting where I can provide nonpartisan guidance, education, training, and expertise.
So we have gone through an odyssey of sorts here in New York with our redistricting map. For those who don't remember, and correct me if I've forgotten, but in 2014, the voters put in a constitutional amendment for what they call an independent redistricting commission, though I'm not sure that that was allowed on the ballot, and I'm not sure it is, but there is an equal number of bipartisan representatives on the commission. And so, an equal number of Democrats and Republicans and a couple of independents. These people are put on there by political leaders. And in 2020, 2022, they were unable to come up with a bipartisan map on the congressional districts. They did on the assembly, and no, they didn't on the assembly either, right? Or the state.
Well, what happened was, if you want me to just give
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
recitation, the so-called Independent Redistricting Commission, and we're calling it so-called because it's appointed by the legislature and it reports to the legislature. So it's not really an independent commission. And a court in 2014, in reviewing the wording that the State Board of Elections uses to put on the ballot to inform voters, took the word independent off the explanation, saying this is not independent. But the title of the commission in the Constitution is the Independent Commission. So that commission was tasked with developing maps for the Assembly, the Senate, and Congress. After the commission imploded, they sent a set of maps to the legislature. They were rejected. At that point, now we're talking about January 2022, the commission was tasked with regrouping and sending a second set of maps to the legislature, but they couldn't do that. So the legislature—
And let's nail down on why they couldn't do that, because I think this is an underreported fact that the reason why they couldn't come up with that second map is the Republicans refused to even participate in the second map drawing. Is that correct? They
Well,
wouldn't.
depending on who you're listening to, the Democrats say the Republicans wouldn't come back to a meeting. The Republicans say the Democrats wouldn't negotiate in good faith. So there was a lot of finger pointing back and forth. But the bottom line is that the commission failed to meet, and I think it's more provable that the Republicans refused to go back to a meeting, balking at what they thought was the intransigence of the Democrats to negotiate in good faith. Take it as it is, the commission fell apart. So the legislature then stepped in and decided, because it's their responsibility to enact the final plan, to draw the map for Congress, the Senate, and the Assembly. And the same day that the governor signed the bills for the three maps, February 3rd, 2022, the Republicans went to court in Steuben County. They knew there were three judges there, and they were all Republicans. They knew what they were getting into, and urged the court successfully to invalidate the plan because the legislature did not have the power to step in after the commission fell apart and failed to send the second set of maps. So there was a lot of litigation 2 years ago from the trial court located in Bath, New York, to the appellate division in Rochester, to the Court of Appeals in Albany. But by May of 2022, the courts decided that the assembly map was not challenged in court by the Republicans because the Republicans and Democrats cut a bipartisan deal to accommodate all of their members in the assembly. Even though the map itself was improperly enacted, it wasn't challenged. The Senate map was challenged and the congressional map was challenged. And the court held that the Senate map needed to be redrawn and the congressional map needed to be redrawn. Plus, the congressional map was a partisan gerrymander. It was drawn to overly benefit the Democrats. The court said that had the assembly plan been challenged, it too would have been invalidated for this process problem. So the court in April, May of 2022 appointed Jonathan Serves, a postdoctorate fellow at Carnegie Mellon University and an expert in this business, to draw the congressional map and the Senate map. A few months later, a separate lawsuit challenged the assembly map. And in that case, rather than have a court draw the new assembly map, the commission actually got itself back together again and worked out a bipartisan compromise plan for the assembly. Not that much different than the plan the assembly itself enacted in 2022, and all ended very happily without more litigation over the assembly. But a different track was taken over the congressional districts, and that's what led to the decision that came down from the State Court of Appeals last week.
So we're back at drawing just the congressional maps because the lawsuit that the Democrats brought to have the congressional maps redrawn, they said that the maps by Jonathan Serves, the special master in Dumas County, were only supposed to be there for 2 years, not for the full 10-year run of the redistricting. And they cited the court decision saying that it didn't say it was supposed to be there for the 10 years, which, there's a little bit of schadenfreude there because the Republicans went and chose their judge, and this is the judge that ordered it. And then now the New York Court of Appeals finally, after several months of litigation and going up through the process, has ordered the congressional maps redone, but the Senate maps are set because the Democrats didn't sue on the Senate map. Is that correct?
That no one challenged the Senate maps. And in fact, using the court-drawn map, the Senate Democrats increased their numbers in the November 2022 elections. That map was actually better for the Democrats in the state Senate.
Yeah, well, the blind squirrel gets a nut every now and then, but sorry, I'm dealing with a cough here. But so we are back to redrawing the congressional map. So what is the process? And as one thing that we didn't mention was the constant legal maneuvering in 2022 added another primary, an August primary, which really, I think, led to the electoral results that we had because we didn't even know who candidates were until August. And, that's where some of the things like George Santos came about, I think, because he was kind of hiding for a long while until we had actual races. So, but there's, I guess, a possibility of that happening again. But why don't you lay out what the court is expecting here for the Independent Redistricting Commission and the legislature with these
Well,
congressional
the
maps?
court last week told the commission to, reorganize, get back to work, and send a new congressional map to the legislature by February 28th, 2024. Ironically, one day after petitioning for the June 25th primary starts. And I do think that the commission is going to speed its work up a bit and get a map to the legislature well before February 28th, but it's too early to know at this time. But the court essentially held the big takeaway was that redistricting is the final responsibility of the state legislature, and that it's the commission's job to prepare maps for the legislature to consider before it makes its final determination. So we're picking up where things left off. Rather than start from scratch all over again with the first round of maps, the commission picks up where it left off to send a second map for Congress to the commission. I'm sorry, to the legislature. Now, there are 10 members of the commission. They're pretty much divided, 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans. The independents you mentioned, each one of them, 2 of them, have sided with the Ds or the Rs, and they are talking about compromise, about a bipartisan plan, but we haven't seen that yet. So one of several things can happen. One is that the commission agrees, they develop a bipartisan map, they send it to the legislature with 7 of their 10 votes, at least 7, and of those 7 votes, that requires the affirmative vote of at least 1 representative from each of the 4 partisan legislative leaders to the commission. And if they reach those 7 votes, the map goes to the Assembly and to the Senate. They could vote it up, they can reject it. If it's rejected, then the legislature can actually draw a map of its own. And of course, any map is subject to the final stage to receive the governor's approval. So we have to count her in as well. Now, the commission might deadlock and not reach an agreement. And at that point, my sense is that the Democrats, the 5 Democrats, will submit a map to the legislature, because the Constitution allows that if the commission fails to agree on a bipartisan map, then the map with the most votes can be sent to the legislature.
So let's drill down on that, because I think this is where things can get interesting and hairy again. Is that, as I recall, as I talked about earlier, the Republicans refused to come back to the table in the second round of maps. Could the Republicans just refuse to come back to the table again, and even despite the court order, or refuse to take a vote on a map?
well,
They're
they
saying that
could.
if the Democrats only take a vote on a map, they can send it to the legislature, or they could send competing maps to the legislature if there's 5 votes for 2 different sets of maps.
That could happen. The real big question is, the Republicans now are talking about bipartisan cooperation and playing ball. Now, whether that changes, if they turn their backs and refuse to participate, that's yet to be seen. So we're taking them on good faith now that they will actually show up at meetings and take votes and participate. If they don't, I think you'll see court action to issue what they call a writ of mandamus, forcing a public official to act after the official refuses to or fails to act. But that could get dramatic. We're not quite there yet. But the key thing is whether the commission could get a meeting together and get a map with the most votes, which might be only 5 votes, to the legislature. That would overcome the fatal flaw that took place last year when nothing was sent to the legislature.
So do they need 6 members of the committee to meet?
Well, for a quorum, they would. And I've been wondering, well, if they don't reach a quorum and they only have 5 members, what would a court do? And a court might just throw its hands up and say, this is a unique circumstance. We don't want the courts to draw maps. The court said last week, that's not our job to do. But this hasn't happened before, where we don't have public officials appointed to do their work not show up.
Right, and it remains, one of the reasons that I pointed out the long history. This is not something that has been tried before. This independent redistricting commission is its first time in actual use, and I think it's pointing out some of the flaws with the way it's constructed. And it was constructed when there were Republicans in the Senate and Democrats in the Assembly, and a more conservative governor with Andrew Cuomo, and making a deal to construct this in this way, envisioning a bipartisan legislature that would need to make a deal. But now, with the independent redistricting commission can't make a decision, that the legislature is now not only Democratic, but with veto-proof majorities in the Democratic coalitions, meaning that they have a strong base to pass the maps that they want. And so that's where we're at, right?
Right. Frankly, the amendment that voters passed in 2014 was a concoction of Andrew Cuomo and the then Republican Senate majority to help ensure that the Republicans kept their majority in the state Senate. No one ever thought, first of all, that the then independent Democratic Conference would disappear, and when the breakaway Democrats who organized with the Republicans were no longer a factor, and no one ever thought that the Democrats would gain supermajorities in the Senate and the Assembly, giving one party complete control of the process. So the Republican Senate idea of power forever fell apart after the Democrats won the Senate in 2018 and took control of this process in 2020.
So I'm going to ask you two competing ideas, neither of which I really agree with, but I think it's the thing that I hear out there the most right now. The first competing idea is that, and New York Daily News kind of alluded to this in their editorial just the other day or today or something like that, but saying that we should just pass the map that was passed before because it was a competitive map and it allowed for bipartisanship, and thus we shouldn't go through this whole process again. And then there's the other competing idea that says that states like North Carolina and Arizona and other states that are in Florida are in Texas, they are hyper partisan gerrymandered states for the Republicans, and states like New York and California need to be hyper partisan gerrymanders for the Democrats to balance that out. What do you think about those competing ideas?
Well, the plan that was enacted by the state court last year was a legitimate legal plan. And technically, nothing prevents the commission from rubber stamping it and approving it for use in the future. But people had problems and issues with that map. I think one example is where the map redrew Manhattan Island. Since at least the last century, there's been an East Side district and a West Side district. And having lived in Manhattan's East Side, I know what it's like as opposed to the West Side. But
That's the Maloney-Nadler.
right, the court drew one district that took basically Manhattan north of 14th Street and south of 125th Street into one big district. And by doing so, New York lost decades of seniority and power in Congress. Carolyn Maloney chaired the Government Reform and Operations Committee. Jerry Nadler chaired the Judiciary Committee. And by pairing two full committee chairs together in one district where one of them had to lose, that's a hit that we really don't want to afford. New York had 45 members of Congress during World War II. We're now down to 26, the same number we had in 1820. So New York has lost a lot, and anytime we lose more congressional districts, and especially pairing powerful incumbents against each other, that hurts. So there was some dissatisfaction with the map that was drawn. I'm not going to really get into district by district, whether it goes D or goes R, but the map was drawn by a court, and what the decision last week tells us is that that's all well and good, but the map needs to be drawn by the legislature. It's not the court's job to do this. That's why, hypothetically, you could take the commission, the special master's map, rubber stamp it, pass it in the Assembly and the Senate, and you got a map. That actually happened 30 years ago. The Assembly and the Senate took a state court-drawn congressional map and made it its own map. They passed it as a chapter law. The real reason being that a federal court was going to put its own plan in place unless the state acted. And at that point in time, the state had to get approval from the U.S. Department of Justice under the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, to implement the map. And a court can't do that. They don't have the ability. So the legislature took the map, the court drew, rubber stamped it, then we're able to use the legislature's resources to submit the map to Washington for approval.
So you said an example in New York City, and I think that's very important to the people of New York City, but that's really not what we're fighting over here. I mean, I think there's what I believe the litigants, and I say we, I mean we as New York, not you and me, but or even me at all, because I'm neutral in this, but they're going to really talk about the Republican districts and how many of those are going to survive intact in the new, either in the bipartisan redistricting commission or or in the legislature. And we do have some protections for Republicans already in law, which is the home rule law, that prevents partisan gerrymandering, which is what the court also found with the New York State Legislature map, that it was also a partisan gerrymander. This isn't just a process thing. They said that the first map was a partisan gerrymander. And so for the congressional map, the legislature can't just act, put in
Right. Yeah.
their other map.
The state constitution has language that prevents favoring or disfavoring candidates or parties. And that's what the court used last year to knock out the congressional map. Now, I believe that even if the Democratic map had been used last year, at least in some of those districts that were, being, bones of contention, Republicans would have still won those districts regardless, especially downstate New York. George Santos would have won almost in any map that was drawn. But the question now is, and there's no definition of what a gerrymander is. Parties bring in experts who run algorithms and run numbers and say this plan is too partisan one way or this plan is too partisan the other way. That's up to a judge or a panel of judges to decide whether it's overreaching or not. In the Harkenrider case, the case that knocked out the congressional map last year, the judge only considered the Republicans' expert and didn't even pay attention to the Democratic expert's report. Problem was the Democratic plan had so many optical outliers. It had a map, one district went from Suffolk County to the Connecticut border. Another in Brooklyn, Staten Island, jumped over different communities to favor a progressive Democrat. Optics matter here, but you could draw districts that are fairly compact, that are somewhat competitive, but will give one party an advantage over the other. And after all, one party will control the House and another party won't. It's not like we're playing this is a zero-sum game here. And there's no reason why a legislature can't draw a map that's fair, that's legal, and that would be supported by the courts, even if it favors one party over another. There's no rule to create 50-50 districts. You can't do that. And also in New York now, so many different Democratic areas have trended Republican. I look at Nassau County as one example where the Republicans increased their power
Right. Yeah.
in the last month's election in Democratic bastions. I live downstate in Long Beach at the southern end of Nassau County by the ocean. My local government went Republican for the first time in 50 years in what used to be a Democratic congressional district. So, there are other factors at play here as well.
And we're going to really see how this plays out in that New York 3, special election that's coming up. The George Santos old seat where Tom Swansea is running, to see if there's any, if a Democrat can't regain that after the Santos thing, then we're going to really see some panic about Long Island, I think.
And both parties have very strong candidates.
Yep.
Tom Swansea served as county executive, as congressman from that area, as mayor of a small city in that district. He's been around in public life for over 30, almost 40 years. And the Republicans put up a very attractive candidate. She is Ethiopian, she's Jewish, she's female, she's a Democrat running as a Republican. And she'll be
I didn't know that she's a registered
she's a
Democrat.
registered Democrat, yes.
Okay.
But she's going to be a very strong candidate, and that district does have more Republican areas in it than the Democratic plan that was rejected had. And both parties are now focusing their campaigns on these areas that are traditionally Republican in the southeast part of Nassau County, areas called Massapequa and Farmingdale.
So, and it's important to remind the viewers that the Supreme Court probably has no role in this because they've already rejected partisan gerrymandering as a matter for the Supreme Court. They said state courts can deal with this, but
Right.
not the Supreme Court. There's no racial gerrymandering, you know, allegation from the Republicans towards the Democrats. So more than likely, whatever we get out of this process, it ends there. It ends with what the legislature draws. Unless they draw something that's hyper gerrymandered, and then the courts will step in again, which could lead to another August primary. And at that point, do you think it's likely that they would just enact the old maps for another 2 years, or would they?
Well, yeah, right now it's a race against time. It works to the Republicans' advantage to delay action in the commission and the legislature because the closer you get to February, the end of February, and if you don't have a map in place, then there's a greater likelihood that the court-joined map could be used for one more election cycle. Now, for the Democrats, they want to get this done as soon as possible to have a new map in place. My sense is the best time to complete this process is early February, so as to give candidates and county boards of elections enough time to prepare for the primary. And I don't think what people want to see is a delay of having another August primary for Congress.
I
So,
definitely don't want to see that.
yeah, so these are
I
different
already got two
factors.
elections I'm running before the general already. I don't want three.
Yeah.
So
So, the Republican lawyers will probably be prepared to go to court to stop any procedural move that they think the Democrats are using unfairly. And there are lots of different, tricks that they can, different maneuvers, different parts of the law that they can pull out that, can try to delay the process. Because without a map, to have a map out of the commission February 28th just isn't realistic since petitioning starts February 27th unless the state board or the legislature change those dates. So we
and I
want
think
to,
it has to be the legislature because I don't think the state board can change it because
no,
we've
they can
already been
suggest,
talking to them about changing it because the first day to turn in petitions is April 2nd, which we happen to be doing a presidential primary on. So there's been some talk about moving it earlier, moving it later. My guess is moving it earlier now becomes even more problematic. So, there's a real question about uh, that already, and this was nothing to do with gerrymandering and redistricting. Had everything to do with the work of the boards of elections. But but it's my understanding that only the legislature can move that
right.
period.
I mentioned the board because the board could tell the legislature how much time is needed to undertake various stages of the process. But the best thing to happen right now is for the Democrats and Republicans to get together because the Democrats in the legislature now have the power to do this, and the Republicans, being in the minority, can get their best deal by sitting down with the Democrats and working out something that's amenable to both sides. Democrats will obviously have the upper hand, but Republicans need to determine what they need at a minimum. But in short of that, they're going to have to throw the whole thing out by getting a court to put things off. So we just don't know yet how it's going to go, but we can see how the scenarios line up.
Well, Jeff, I'm looking forward to finding out what the maps are so I can tell my candidates what the maps are. But
Yeah.
I'll look forward to a conversation with you sometime in March so we can kind of recap, how this went, as long as it's settled by then, and see what it means for the future.
We'll know by March if we're having a new map, whether we're using the old map again, or whether we're going to buy more time and have a new map later in the year with a primary later in the year.
Right.
These things are too early to tell right now because the things have to play out.
All right. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming back on my program, and have a happy holiday season, and I try to get some rest I know you're getting a lot of calls because of this, but try to get some rest of the season. Okay.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Happy holidays to you, all your viewers, and we will have a politically packed 2024 ahead.
Yes, we will. And that was my interview with Jeff Wice. Just an amazing wealth of knowledge for redistricting. He really laid it out about the 8-week process that we're about to go through, starting now until February 28th, and how we're going to get new congressional lines for New York State. A lot of questions, but we'll be talking to him after this gets done to kind of go over what he thinks the new lines look like, and if there's going to be any political challenges or legislative challenges to the actual lines that are drawn, or litigation challenges. There's all kinds of challenges that are going to come about. This week, I plan on continuing my content schedule after Christmas. On Tuesday, Commissioner in the car, and we'll be talking about the even year election alignment legislation that is being signed by Governor Hochul today. And we'll go over what that means and how that's all going to go down between now and 2030. And then, of course, this weekend I'll be doing the weekly wonk. I'll have a wrap up of our um, election year 2023. We'll be talking about election day turnout, and of course the turnout for overall. Zoom and starting next week will be with Max Ruckteschel. He's the chair of the Onondaga County Democratic Committee, and we'll be talking about the year past and the year ahead for the Onondaga County Democrats, and what their successes in the years past and what they're hoping to do in 2024. As always, go to DustinCharny.com and you can like and subscribe and get email notifications for all my content and election news updates. And it'll always be free. I pay for it out of my own pocket, no ads, no private money. This is my voter education promise to Onondaga County. That's what I try to do, and that's been the most effective way to do it. So check it all out, and please enjoy your holidays and stay safe. Bye bye.